Well, howdy, cowboys. It's Dev with his prettiest horse, the chicken, and welcome to Thunder Junction. That's right, we're in Thunder Junction right now. We were in Thunder Junction the whole time. 8 years on YouTube, I've been in Thunder Junction. We got normal rooms and couches here in Thunder Junction. I'm sick of everybody thinking it's just rattlesnake rugs and cow skulls. I ain't gonna put no cow skull on the wall. I love cows. They're delicious. But I know why you come here today. You want to see the top 50 cards from my home plane. And hey, if this is my home plane and it's all villains, does that mean I'm a villain? Discuss in the comments section. But yeah, top 50 for the cowboy set, baby. Let's go.
And I'm your favorite magic channel's favorite magic channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back, Pilgrim. Make sure you like the video, sub to the sandwich, and check out the Patreon. Link in the description. It's the only way I make any money around here. But we got to go ahead and jump into it because I got 50 of these cards to look at, plus honorable mentions. Plus, my SD card only has so much space. We'll see how long it holds up. So let's go ahead and hit you with the real quick. There's a few of them. Now, we'll start with a couple of cards I love so much. I want to freaking kiss them and make little cardboard babies with them. We got stuff like Rakish Crew and Vile Smasher over here. One is a Bastion of Remembrance for Just Outlaws, and the other one is a Corpse Knight for Just Outlaws. But I still really, really like them, and I think there's plenty of support for them, but we'll see if they pop off or not. Kind of doubt it. I'm going to play with them, though. I'm also just going to throw Tarnation Vista into this crop of cards because I'm not sure it's actually very good, but you do have to give a land that taps for more than 1 mana at least the minimum amount of respect, and that's exactly what I'm doing. And finally, fast lands, because if they're not an honorable mention, they have to be like in the top 3, and I just don't want to do that. It seems a little bit boring, but for standard, these are the most impactful cards in the set by a country mile, so I just really wanted to bring them up somewhere. Let's go ahead and hit the list, everybody. New personal best for honorable mentions? I think so. But number 50, as usual, is kind of an extension of the honorable mentions. It's either a card that's not actually super good, or it's the best card in the set. That's kind of the sweet spot I'm trying to hit with 50. It can be hard, but this time I chose Gold Vein Hydra. Now I know, everybody, it looks pretty good to a lot of people, myself included. Never met a Hydra I didn't like, and this guy's in that category too. That's why he's on the list, but I still have serious doubts this dude is quite as good as he looks, especially in a standard environment at least, with like 4 different spells that can exile him that like everybody plays. We're at the point where being Wandering Emperor proof is good, but it doesn't really save you from being exiled. That said, the card did make the list. If it ever does die, or like you sacrifice it or something, and suddenly you strike gold, and while it's on the table, that's a lot of keywords, so I do respect the card, and I kind of hope that I'm wrong and it's actually like in the top 10 or something, but I'm just not quite seeing it. So I'll move on to number 49, proof that I actually do like big creatures. I wasn't just bagging on the Hydra for no reason. Again, it made the list. I had to cut like 7 cards I really like from this list, so just the fact that Gold Vein Hydra is still here, kind of a big deal. But number 49 is Bonnie Paul. Like I said, I just cut a bunch of stuff from this list, but I just didn't have the heart to cut Bonnie. I actually think this has a real chance in standard. This is 6 mana for like 12 power, and at least like a drawn card, or maybe even more the turn that it comes into play. Maybe you drop a land with it. You never know, right? So I think the fact that this has like a trigger that happens the turn it comes out, plus the fact that it gives you 2 huge dudes your opponent has to deal with. You can ramp it out, you can blink it once it's out if that's what you want to do, you can reanimate it, get a lot of value. So I don't know, I just think there actually might be something there for the big dumb Simic Paul Bunyan clone. Paula Bunyan, everybody. I think it's a good card. Number 48, let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum as far as creatures are concerned, because I've shown you a couple of huge dudes already, but I should also show you Reckless Lackey. I just really like this guy. Like, he's pauper playable, so I guess that's something I should at least bring up. But in standard and even beyond, this guy does help out multiple decks. The Outlaw decks obviously also helps out the Goblin decks for what that's worth, and the Pirate decks, like 3 different aggro decks that all need a solid 1-drop. And this is a solid 1-drop, you know. It's a decent Raging Goblin in the early game that doesn't die to stuff that gives it -1 toughness or does 1 damage. There's a number of things in standard where that actually matters. And then later on in the game, you cash it in for a card and a treasure token. That's not bad, even though the ability cost a bit much. But, you know, let's say you have Captain Lannery Storm out in your pirate deck. You just got a treasure, boosts all your other pirates. That's kind of nice. Let's say you're playing goblins, got yourself a Krinko, sacrifice the treasure it gives you. All your other goblins get counters or whatever. I don't know. Like, there's multiple things for this dude to do. He is so much more than just a Raging Goblin, but even though he's not Ragavan or anything, he is one of the better Raging Goblins I've like ever seen. Number 47 is Dust Animus. In case you haven't noticed yet, these first 5 cards are all cards I think might have a chance in standard, but I'm not like super sure about, and this is definitely a good one to continue that trend. This is a card that could also be like in the top 20 pretty easily, but I'm playing it really safe here because I think this is just going to be like a 2 mana 2/3 way too often. But I also think that this could just be a 4/5 flying lifelink, and then what's your opponent going to do about that? Goes in ramp decks fairly well because you're going to get to that 5 land total a little bit faster. Goes well in control decks too. You know, you resolve some sort of sweeper, and then next turn you get this down with all your lands untapped as a 4/5 flying lifelink. Try to recover from that if you're the opponent. So I don't know. There's a few different decks this goes in, and if nothing else, it can just go in like White X flying decks or like aggro decks or whatever, because, you know, as an aggro player early on, you got yourself an evasive 2-drop with 2 power. I'll take that. But later on in the game, I just has 4/5 if the game goes too long, you know. So again, it just goes in way too many different kinds of decks to ignore. Now, finishing off my standard maybes here, although I guess the entire list is kind of standard maybes, right? But number 46 is Rakdos the Muscle. I really like a dude that you can just make go indestructible, and he's got like really good stats. The only problem is that he's 5 mana. That's lit. That's it. That's the only problem with this guy is that he's 5 mana. I literally see no other issue with the dude aside from that. He does kind of suffer from some of the same problems as Goldvein Hydra. We're in a format right now in standard, at least, where there's a ton of exiles, so I'm not sure how good the go indestructible mode's actually going to be, but in case you ever catch an opponent with a handful of deadly cover-ups and go for the throats, it seems like it's a pretty good card. But hey, everybody, you have now entered the Commander Corner. We're going to look at some of the stronger Commanders and Commander cards from the set for 45 through 40, starting with Bristle Bill Sponsor. There are some people excited about this card in Standard, and like, I can vibe. Seems okay. But in Commander, I could definitely see this being good, either like as your Commander, put you in mono green, but there's plenty of landfall stuff to do there, or just in the 99 of landfall where he's kind of a ridiculous card if you happen to draw him. But, you know, back to Standard, there's plenty of +1/+1 counter shenanigans for this guy to get involved in. There's plenty of lands being played. There's plenty of cards that let you play extra lands in a turn or whatever, so he's kind of good there. And if you can somehow reduce, perhaps, his activated ability, maybe Agatha, maybe we actually have a use for that card. But yeah, putting counters on all your guys is really, really good too. So for just a 2-drop, that's actually kind of a good bit of value. So again, I understand why people are excited about him in Standard, but if nothing else, this dude is an awesome Commander card forever. Number 44 is Obika, Splitter of Seconds. My goodness. This is another one I kind of wanted to cut from the list, but I had to throw some Commander players some red meat at some point during this list, and don't worry, there's plenty more entries where I'll say like, oh, this card's good in Commander, but Obika is almost unashamedly, unapologetically a Commander card, and I kind of respect that about it. But who knows, maybe there's something ridiculous you can do in Standard with this if you set it up correctly, or maybe there will be in the near future. I'm not sure, but all I know is that more than most other cards in a set where there kind of are a lot of Commander cards, let's be honest, this is the most Commander of them all. I think I have to at least acknowledge it. 43 is Esoteric Duplicator. I had a hard time deciding between this and Substitute Synthesizer, but at the end of the day, I felt like this was the much cooler card, man. You can just make token copies of artifacts. It sounds awesome. Like, obviously, there are artifacts that you can just sacrifice because they sacrifice. It's baked in. But what I really want to do with this, even in Standard, is tricks where you can just sacrifice a big, silly artifact and then get a copy of it. And then maybe copy the copy and then copy that copy. Who knows? There's got to be fun tricks with this. And even though it is 3 mana to get out in the first place, which is too much for a clue, right? I still think that like the potential for this thing to just be absolutely absurd is definitely there. So I wanted it on the list at some point. Hope I'm not being duped by this one, but it looks like a pretty fun Magic card to me, especially if you can untap and you got Nanigans available. Seems like you'll be doing all right. But number 42 is Bugs over here. Claim Jumper. I really didn't know where to put this card. It's been all over the place while I'm writing this list, like 7 or 8 rewrites at this point. But yeah, it's been everywhere between like 49 and 35. It just keeps jumping around appropriately, but I do think it's a good enough card to be on the list somewhere almost certainly. For one, it doesn't say anything about basic planes on it anywhere. You can get like a Surveil Land with this, you can get a Triome with this, you can get anything that is planes, and I think that's actually really sweet. But it can also just double ramp you. Like even in Standard, if you're playing against ramp, that's going to catch you up on lands really fast and give you a body. In Commander, it's probably even better because the chances that somebody has more lands than you are, I guess, 3 times higher statistically in that format, so that's kind of nice. But altogether, I just think it's a sweet little card. I hope I didn't take a wrong turn at Albuquerque with this one, but it had to make my list. Number 41 is Loot, the Key to Everything, and I'm not sure I even wanted him on the list, but he just kept looking at me with those like Puss in Boots eyes, and I was like, okay, buddy, what am I going to do about that? He cast Charm. It worked. So honestly, if I'm going to devote like a whole 5 slots on the list to Commander stuff specifically and only, loot's gonna be in that block of cards. But I do think, despite the fact this is an awesome commander, he is getting kind of a bad rap in Standard, and I'm among the people who have contributed to that bad rap and kind of been like ho-hum about the card. But even if you only have like one other permanent and you untap with this in play, or non-land permanent, then you draw an extra card. I know you're not drawing it, but I'm just going to shorthand. You draw the card. And if you have like 2 or 3 different other permanent types or whatever, then like suddenly that's a lot of cards a turn. So your opponent kind of has to kill this, and must kill creatures tend to be pretty good. So I know he's kind of an awkward color combination in Standard right now, but I think he might have a shot there. But if nothing else, I'm sure the commander tricks are just out of this world, so he's got to be on the list somewhere. Even as much as I resent that this card is probably supposed to be Magic the Gathering's Baby Yoda or something, I have to acknowledge it's a pretty fun Magic card, but I don't think it's necessarily the best straight-up commander card in the entire set. Number 40 is Railway Brawler, and I'm still not sure this is the best commander card in the entire set, but it's really close. And just like Loot, this has a chance in Standard too, believe it or not. I don't love the idea of plotting this, gotta be honest with you, but if you do plot it, then the turn you play it, you get it for free, and then hopefully a big old creature that becomes an even bigger old creature. So you can get some value out of this the turn it comes into play, so long as you sacrifice your turn 3 or 4 to do so. I don't love doing that, but when you look at it in terms of pure stats, he's kind of a nice guy for what you're actually paying for him, so I guess there's that. But if you play just about any creature while he's on the table, God forbid multiple creatures, then suddenly it's really dangerous. What a dangerous Magic card. So again, I want to acknowledge that like if mono green stompy ramp something is like a thing in the format, then this probably has at least a small shot. But again, in Commander, I think this is one of those that's going to be kind of a sought after card for a good long time because the effect is so insane there. But number 39 is Another Round. My favorite thing about this card is that it kind of reminds me of the original ending to Futurama. You want to go around again? That whole thing makes me cry. But either way, the card itself is pretty good too. Honestly, I think this also might have a shot in Standard. It doesn't look like the most Standard playable card in the world. It's a bit slow, 7 mana for 2 blinks and all that, but that doesn't mean there won't be some strategy or some deck or some grouping of cards that can take advantage of a card like this at some point in its Standard life cycle, and that time might be now. I don't want to just call this card garbage. I really think it might have a chance in the Standard, but at the same time, again, a commander card. The real cheese with this card is obviously in Commander. So knock yourselves out there, Commander players. It's going to be a lot of fun. But again, might be sneaky good in Standard. There's a chance. Number 38 is Maresa, Dealer of Death. Dev, are we still talking about Commander-specific stuff at this point? I'm actually not sure, to be honest with you. You may have noticed as I was going through the Commander stuff that for each entry, I talked more and more about how good the card might be in Standard. And I think that Maresa is basically the ultimate example of a card like that. You know, looks mostly like a Commander card, but might actually have real Standard relevance. For one, this is one of the few things in like the whole set that cares about crimes, but isn't limited to once per turn. That's because it's a little bit mana intensive, but you know, you can play a land and commit a crime. You can just have played a legend because of all the join up cards, and that commits a crime. You can attack with multiple creatures and get triggers or whatever, and those are all crimes. So like there's plenty of cheap ways that don't even involve casting spells or whatever to commit crimes. So this could fill your hand very quickly and your graveyard for what that's worth, and that might be worth an awful lot. So I really like this card, and I want to give it a shot in Standard. But number 37 is Bristle Bud Farmer, because there just ain't nothing wrong with this guy. You know, he might be a bit of a prick. I don't know, it's a cactus joke, sorry, but still. A 4 mana 5/5? With an ETB trigger that also draws cards and like mills cards incidentally in case you want that, you might. So, okay, mono green, maybe you can do better in your 4-drop slot, but I'm not actually convinced that you can. If you're building a food deck, maybe, maybe Simic Artifacts actually wants a 4-drop as long as it means it gets to play this guy. There's just absolutely no downside to this Jism Djinn. There's nothing but upside. Even if your opponent can't blow it away with a go for the throat or whatever, you get 2 foods out of it. Could have been worse. And if your opponent leaves it on the table, not only is it trampling over for 5 a turn, but it's also getting you real card advantage. It attacks even once, replaces itself in your hand. Solid creature. Why is no one talking about this thing? Number 36 is Hard Bristle Bandit. A couple of bristle cards in a row. We got a whole brush going at this point. This is just one of the better mana dorks that I've seen in a long time. I don't know about you guys, but just, to my mind, this looks like an incredible mana dork. It can untap. It taps for 2 mana a turn of any color. Sign me up, dude. Like, it's easily one of the better lower rarity cards in the entire set. I wish I had a lot more to say about it, but I think it's like super self-evident that a guy that you can fairly easily tap for 2 mana a turn, starting on turn 3 it's all right. You know, he casts Cut Down for free effectively. Oh, these are all good lines. I just think this card is kind of busted. Number 5 is Kyve the Punisher. I've been playing Karavic's Torch for like 25, 30 years at this point, but I never knew this is what the guy looked like. I'm sure he's been depicted on other cards before, and I just forgot, but still, I'm not too impressed. Honest, I figured I'd be more scared of him, but still, 3 mana for a 3/3 is not the best line in the world anymore. But the fact that he lets you just cast stuff out of your graveyard, it's black spells, by the way. Everyone seems to think it's instants and sorceries. No, you can cast creatures and enchantments and planeswalkers. You can cast whatever you want out of your graveyard whenever you commit a crime, and that's disgusting. That's a disgusting Magic card, guys. I really want to put this like way farther up the list, like in the top 15 or something like that, but I am tempering my expectations a bit. I think there's a lot of other, maybe better stuff you could be doing in 3 mana, in black right now. But at the same time, it's incredibly tempting. What's your opponent always doing when you play your Shieldred? Killing it. You know what I mean? So maybe having the ability to get your Shieldred back when you go for the throat something is good. I don't know. Question mark? Seems okay to me. 34 is And It Joins Up. Get on your bikes and ride. It's a good card, man. Like 4 mana for a removal spell at sorcery speed is not what you want to be doing, but at least this is one of the join ups that does something. All the join ups do something when they come into play, but some are definitely better than others, and some didn't even make this list. I can't tell you how many times I tried to work Tiny Bones Joins Up onto this list, but I just kept thinking, this is a hopeless nightmare. Would that make your list? No, I love that card, but it wouldn't make my list. So again, I had to kick off a couple of join ups that I didn't want to kick off this list, but Annie stays on, again, mostly as a commander card, because like, geez, have you read the stinking thing? Have you had time yet while I've been yammering on? But in case you haven't, it's obviously great in that format, but even in standard, Pioneer, Explorer, like seriously, this card could be great. Even at 4 mana, could have plenty of relevance the turn it comes out beyond just the removal mode. Number 33 is Collector's Cage. This one keeps bouncing around on the list too as I rewrite it, man. I know it's a cage, but you really can't contain the card itself, because it's been number 11 at one point, but I just like keep losing confidence in it the more I read it, but I do still like it. I wish it was as easy as I want it to be to get Coven, 3 different creatures with different power or whatever, but it's probably not in such a sweeper heavy standard. That said, this card does help you modify your creature's powers, so it's a lot easier so long as you have enough bodies to actually end up getting the hideaway on this. But that said, I also think it's possible to get the hideaway on this relatively quick if your opponent's not sweeping you, and then you get a free card for not actually that much investment. In the meantime, by the way, it's like not free, but it's like an extra +1/+1 counter on your dudes like every turn that can mess up combat math, especially if your opponent forgets about it. It is a thing you can do at instant speed, so that's kind of nice some of the time. Altogether, I just think this is kind of like a Lunarch Aspirant that also is a fight rigging. Like I said, it's like a white fight rigging. Is that good enough? It's good enough to make my list. 32 is Akul the Unrepentant. Mostly a standard pick for this one, but it could be other formats too, for all I know. Who knows, man? Playable in Pioneer? Could be. But in Standard and beyond, we have Gleeful Demolition in the format right now, along with cards like Voldaren Epicure, Blood Tithe Harvester, like little dudes that give you a little bit of value so that you can actually Gleeful something, but you also don't mind sacking them if it means you get a big guy. So, Rakdos Atraxa could definitely be a thing, man. A free creature starting as early as turn possibly 3 even, but more realistically 4. Let's go. And even if they can kill the Atraxa or Atali or whatever giant monster you throw down, you got to discover from the Atali, got a bunch of cards from the Atraxa, and you also have a 5/5 Flample. A lot of people look at this card, from what I can tell, from what I've been reading and watching, a lot of people say like, oh, all it does is put a big guy on the table. It puts 2 big guys on the table. They blow away the Atraxa, a 5/5 Flample is still going to end the game pretty quick. Also like to pretend that he's the bad guy from Samurai Jack. Name is really close. Number 31, another legend that I think a lot of you, if you watch my channel, you think I hate this guy, but it's actually Gitrog Ravenous Ride. I'm coming around on the card. There's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with this. I've already pointed out on Twitter that you can do like the Ancient one on an early turn and then throw down Gitrog. 6/5 Trample Haste, draw 8 when you sacrifice your Ancient one. Like, oh, that seems good. Very. And there's a lot of other like fun plays you can make with this card with cards that you're actually likely to play in your Magic deck. You don't have to play bad cards at all to make Gitrog work. And maybe the best thing about him, besides the drawing cards and blah, 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 the land you get to play, is just the fact that he's an ambush trample haste with an enormous power. You know, you get this guy down on turn 4 thanks to a little ramp or something like that, then you don't necessarily win the game immediately, but that's a really hard thing for your opponent to do anything about. Even if they have Wandering Emperor up and loaded, ready to go, then like, yeah, they get to exile your frog and that sucks, but maybe you like drew 3 cards before they were able to do that, so you're kind of fine with it, you know? Like, there are a lot of very good things about this card. But honestly, to my mind at least, an even better legend than that is number 30, Malcolm the Eyes. This, again, just like Gitrog, this kind of gets by on stats. You know, Gitrog's a 5-mana 6/5 trample haste, and that's pretty good on rate, you know? But so is a 2-mana 2/2 flyer. Just that right there. I'll take it, man. Like flying and haste on a 2/2. Honestly, a 2/2 haste is sometimes almost worth playing by itself for 2 mana. And when you throw evasion onto it, let's go. Like, it'll also draw me cards as the game goes on. Goes pretty well in sort of an Is It spells deck, or maybe even just like a blue-red straight up and down aggro deck, you know? So this is almost never going to be embarrassing as your 2-drop, and it might even replace itself more than once over the course of a game. Maybe because it's a pirate, right? That treasure, or not treasure, but that investigate is doing something for you. I'm going to bring up Lannery Storm again. Play your second, spell of the turn. And then suddenly you get an investigate, and then suddenly Lannery Storm procs, and all your guys get +1/+1, including your flyers. So I don't know, man. Like, I actually think there's plenty to this card. It supports multiple archetypes by itself, but is honestly just a good enough creature in a vacuum. Anyone with eyes could see that. Number 29 is kind of a weird pick, but it's Slickshot Lockpicker. I called this a Crapcaster Mage. I have a habit of calling anything trying to be Snapcaster Mage Crapcaster Mage, and I still think this is obviously, I have to at least point out, this is like 100 times worse than Snappy, but at the same time, man, this is kind of just like an extra mana to do more or less the exact same thing as a Snapcaster Mage. It's actually not a bad Magic card. And I keep saying that it costs more mana than Snapcaster Mage, but honestly, it could cost no mana. That seems pretty good too, I think this might actually be pretty decent in like a Reenact the Crime deck. You recast your crime fairly easily, or even recast your, Breach the Multiverse or whatever. There's plenty of awesome spells you want to recast in that deck. Even if it's just like go for the throw, you're probably fine with that. Kill your guy, get a body. Okay, like that's kind of why Snapcaster was good in the first place. So I actually think this card could have some like real legs on it, man. And not enough people are paying attention. And that's because you might be a little too picky. Sorry. Number 28 is Duelist of the Mind, a world championship card. Hey, Nathan Stour. Hope I got that right. Seems like a cool guy. Either way, he's a Magic player. He's probably all right. But one way or the other. In older formats, I could especially see this popping off with cards like Brainstorm and even like Ancestral Recall, right? Like anything that costs like a mana and draws you a buttload of cards. Let's go. Like even Ancestral Visions, it basically costs no mana, it draws you 3, so it's really good with this dude, right? He can be a 4-power guy, especially again in those more eternal formats very easily, but even in standard, it shouldn't be too hard to get this guy to 3-4 power, depending on what you're doing. Could go very well too in like Rafine decks, because you connive a bunch when you attack, and that's going to give him big power boosts. Plus, if you target him with Rafine's ability, I don't know, it could get out of control pretty quickly. I'm not sure he's better than like Ledger, Shredder, Fairy Mastermind, like other 2-mana cards, and funny enough, Fairy Mastermind is also a World Championship card, but World Championship cards do tend to be good whether you think they're going to be or not, and I think this dude definitely has more than a small chance of being real, at least at some point in his standard lifespan. But even if he doesn't ever see play in standard, I think he's got a definite chance in other older formats, and that definitely makes it a powerful card. 47 is Generous Plunderer, kind of on a 2-drop spree these last few cards here, but I think this is one of the better ones in the set. Slightly overrated depending on who you talk to, yes, but I really like this second ability. Again, in older formats, it looks even better, just like Duelist of the Mind. I think these last couple of cards are probably technically, they have a chance to be better in eternal formats because, your opponent might have a bunch of Moxen or Soul Ring or whatever if it's vintage, you know what I mean? But there's plenty of artifacts going around in older formats. But even in standard, man, your control opponent is going to have like Incubator Token, Miter 2, maybe a Clue over there. It's like even control opponents have a lot of artifacts, but there's Simic artifacts and plenty of other cookies decks. Blue-white artifacts is kind of a deck. And you've got, decks that put a bunch of blood tokens on the table. You got Boros that puts it's blood and clues on the table. So like there's artifacts everywhere in standard, especially amongst the top decks. So this dude can attack for a lot, and he doesn't even have to get in for combat damage. As soon as he attacks, he hits them for the number of artifacts they control, which is honestly a little bit ludicrous. And even if they don't have artifacts naturally, you can force them to have some. So that's kind of nice too. But I don't know. I just think the guy has a lot going on in a lot of different formats too. So could be smoke settles, dust clears. Actually one of the absolute best cards in the set. So geez, what do I like better than that? Forsaken Miner, everybody. We already have like a few cards in Magic history that are basically exactly like this guy. But that said, they're always going to be good literally every time you see them. So, of course, this guy's on my list. He's almost halfway up my list, dude. He's honestly already shown some promise, too, in the early access event. A surprising amount of players were on Skeletons for the event, and Skeletons looks, I'm going to use the word surprisingly again, strong. Incredibly so. And this dude is a part of that. So are cards like Tiny Bones. We'll get to him in a second, but still, you know, the fact that this is a 1-drop skeleton that keeps coming back over and over, awesome just for skeleton typal, but also great for Aristocrats deck. So, you know, I'm going to love the card. You know, it's an Outlaw too, so it can go in the Outlaw Aristocrats deck as well, or just any Outlaws deck that you want. So there's 3-4 decks this stinking 1-drop goes in, including Mono Black Aggro on day 1 of the format. And it's going to be one of the more relevant cards from the whole set. Just a 1-drop uncommon is going to be just about everywhere. But we are officially halfway through the list. It's about midday. What's another word for midday? High noon, partner. Meet me outside the saloon at high noon. It's a good card, man. It's just Rule of Law. Like, where would I put Rule of Law on this list if it had never existed before? Probably about number 25. It's obviously a solid Magic card, but this one comes with a friggin' win condition on it, guys. Like, come on. Really good. There's plenty of ways, too, to get this back from the graveyard or something like that. You know, like, you don't have to see all 4 copies of High Noon over the course of a game to actually win the game. There are plenty of ways to reanimate it or whatever, you know, maybe even double up the activated ability. There are probably ways to do that, like copy the activated ability or something. Either way, a Rule of Law that casts Lava Axe and can target creatures and planeswalkers seems pretty good to me. So I wanted it on the list somewhere, and I felt like I couldn't resist the midday High Noon joke. So that's why it's number 25. I'm not sure it actually deserves to be here, but I like that joke more than I should have. 24 is Legion Foundry, a sneaky Bone Crusher Giant clone, sort of. So, again, I thought that I was just like being weird comparing this to Bone Crusher, but if you go on Reddit, it turns out everybody else is too, so I don't feel so alone in that assessment. But yeah, the fact that it can actually make multiple creatures over the course of a game is kind of dangerous, turning all those bloods and clues and maps and just random garbage into, you know, 3/3s. Like, let's say my opponent Get Lost's one of my guys and gives me 2 map tokens. Thanks for the 6 power, bud. A really nice guy over there. Thanks. It's also a burn spell. Let's go. Like, there's so many cool things about this card, man. I don't know if it's quite as good as Bone Crusher was. It probably isn't, but in the right kind of deck, absolutely. Note, too, that it gives you a way to sack artifacts. And cards like, say, Esoteric Duplicator we looked at a while back, and plenty of others in this set care about sacrificing artifacts. There's already a few cards in Standard that care about sacking artifacts too, but all things considered, just a really solid Magic card that I wouldn't pay any attention if they didn't put a burn spell right on it, but the fact that they did, and it just like spits out 3/3s the whole game, like, yeah, we can start talking. Number 23 is Safe Oko. Nowhere near as good as the 3-mana Oko that we had to deal with a couple of years back, but still a decent Magic card, which is why he is where he is. I don't expect all the things in the world from this dude, but some people were doing some funky stuff during the early access with him, and he does have plenty of things he can do, man. Like, he can just spit out Elks or whatever, and that's like a fine defensive or offensive mode, depending on what you're playing against. But the ability to become a copy of a creature is where things get very cracked. And in the meantime, he can just like draw and discard stuff for you, set up reanimation. There's just all kinds of stuff this dude does, which means there's all kinds of decks he can go into. Number 22, though, is Kambal Profiteering Mayor. Wouldn't be a dev top 50 if it didn't have an Orzhov legend way higher up the list than it's supposed to be, but I do think there's a lot of really cool stuff about Cammy, dude. Like, first of all, that first ability, not just in Commander, yes in Commander, but in Standard, that does a lot, dude. Like, I've already on a couple of entries talked about how many tokens there are in Standard, usually in the context of artifacts, right? We got all these bloods and clues and maps and yada yada, but also note that that second ability does not trigger only once each turn, and you can actually influence it. It doesn't just care about what your opponent's doing. So whenever you play your Novice Inspectors or your Voldaren Epicures, they shock the opponent now. So there's just all kinds of stuff. If you Gleeful Demolition now, you bolt the opponent. So like Mardu Cambal might be a real deck that people just aren't really on right now, but I just think this card has a ton of stuff it can do. All I'm saying is just try them out, man. If you play Cambal, then you can ball. But let's move on. Let's move on to number 21, which is Tiny Bones. I say we get to him in just a second, and here he is. I have some doubts about this. Like I just want to say that right out on Front Street. This is a 1-mana 1/1 Death Touch, and that might be like all it does, but it's really good in just about any legendary deck out there. We already had some cheap legends, and honestly Ashnob was one of them, so we already had like a 1-drop Death Touch legend in Standard. But the fact that this is a skeleton matters for skeleton typal and for Gisa decks. We'll get to her in just a second, I promise. But it's also just kind of good in mono black aggro. If you can clear a path for him and still have mana open, then sometimes all he really needs to do is cast like a removal or card draw spell or something relatively cheap out of your opponent's yard. The fact that he's a 1-mana legend that actually gives you real value if they let him in, yeah, man. The card is kind of stupid, honestly, I hope. Also worth noting that he is the actual cutest guy in the set. You can show loot to me all you want. This dude is way cuter. By the way, wouldn't it be wild if by some weird twist of fate, loot is actually Tiny Bones, but like with his skin still on or whatever? Like I'm calling that for the twist, everybody. Number 20 is Gisa the Hellraiser. Gisa? Gissa? I don't know, that's still 20 years and I'm still not really sure, but one way or the other, great legend in this set. And if I was gonna mention Tiny Bones Joins Up at any point in the video, it should probably be right now. You have a Tiny Bones Joins Up on the table when you play your Gisa, then you've automatically committed a crime and you automatically get 6 powers worth of zombos. Seems pretty good, but all you have to do is untap with this card on the table and you win the game. I'm pretty sure that's what it says. Once you have access to your mana, everything from Deep Cavern Bat to Duress to Cut Down to Go for the Throat to attacking with a Graveyard Trespasser to play in a desert that does damage to the opponent. There's like 70 things that you can commit crimes with, either free or easy or both. So Gisa's just a nuts creature, dude. I'm not sure if she's better than Aclazotz in the 5-drop slot in like black decks, but she definitely creates some competition in that slot is all I'm gonna say. Number 19 is old Honest Rutstein. We all know he's honest. You can trust him. He's a good creature, by the way. This is another one I've given a little bit of flack to over the course of like the preseason, but that does not mean me calling a card like slightly overrated does not mean I don't think the card is good. Those are different statements. I think this just isn't quite as good as the reputation it's garnering. I don't think it's an Eternal Witness or anything, but that, again, doesn't mean I don't think it's a solid card. You can play this on 3, and then without even having to tap it or anything like that, you can play a 5-drop on 4. So you can play Gissa on 4. We just talked about that card. But you could also play like Gitrog on 4 because of this guy, and then sacrifice him to the Gitrog, draw 3, play some lands. You're feeling pretty good about that, cowboy. So there's plenty of fun lines with this card, and I do think if there's a new Golgari card in this set that is like the most likely to go into the existing Golgari deck, then it's probably this dude right here. That deck plays plenty of creatures that it wants to either put back in its hand with the Raised Dead or cast for much cheaper. Aclazotz on turn 4 sounds pretty good to a deck like this. And even though the body does die to Cut Down or whatever, I kind of don't care. I got some value out of it, and I forced a Cut Down out of the opponent's hand they won't have for a Deep Cavern Bat. Who knows, right? So all I'm saying is that I do think this card is better than I've let on this preseason. But my number 18 is Pest Control, a 2-mana sweeper you can cycle away. That's so good, man. In like every format, you can make an argument this is pretty good in Eternal formats because it's got a fair amount of things it wipes off the table. But all the way up to Standard, again, how many times in videos have I mentioned that there's a bunch of like not just clues and maps and bloods, but also Voldaren and Epicures. Warden of the Inner Sky I haven't brought up yet. That's a pretty good 1-drop. You've got stuff like, Novice Inspector. There are a lot of ones that this knocks off the table, including stuff like Tiny Bones, Joins Up and other cards that we might see from this set. So this card looks kind of bonkers to me as a sideboard piece, but you don't have to board it. Again, this could just be 2-mana draw a card at instant speed, which is something that a lot of Orzhov decks and beyond, Esper, whatever, could also be looking for. Number 17, way up here, is Insatiable Avarice. Now, I could have made this Rush of Dread, the thing that everyone assumes is going to be like a 2-card OTK with Bloodletter of Aclazotz. You just win the game because they lose their entire life total no matter what it is. Seems good, but a little bit fragile, and I'm not sure it's going to be the best deck in Standard, although I did see E-Philly play a good bit with it over the early access event, and she made that deck look very, very good. But all that said, I think that also watching ePhilly taught me that one of the best cards in that deck is Insatiable Avarice. This will not only get whatever sweepers that you might need for the next turn against the aggro decks, but it also just helps put combo pieces into your hand. We've already had a few cards like that in Standard for a good bit if you wanted tutors, but outside of just being a tutor, my favorite thing about this card is it's 3 mana to draw 3 cards, which is an unbelievable rate. Like, if you're not up against aggro, you're not that worried about your life total, whatever, even against the occasional mid-range deck, I wouldn't mind pulling the trigger on this if I had the life to spend on turn 5 or 6 and still have mana open and shields up. I'm telling you, 3 mana for 3 cards is just an incredible deal, and if you pay the entire thing, you get whatever card you want and 2 extra cards. That is a ton of card advantage for 3 or 5 mana. So I just really, really like this thing, and I think it goes in way more stuff than just like the one random combo deck everyone's excited about, myself included. But again, this could have way more homes than just that one deck. 3 mana, 3 cards, let's kind of go. But hey, you need the sweeper next turn. Helps you do that too. Number 16 is the actual best commander card in the entire set. But again, this one's not just commander only. Earlier, when I was talking about commander stuff, I made a point to be like, I don't know, could be good in Standard. And I think the actual ultimate example of a card like that is Nexus of Becoming. This draws you an extra card every single turn. That doesn't make it good enough by itself, but it is a pretty nice little extra piece of icing on top of the total package here, man. But the cake is delicious. Let's not talk about the icing. The cake is the fact that you can just drop a Portal to Phyrexia, an Atali, an Atraxa, whatever, so long as it's an artifact or a creature, for free. You just like, hey, I'm going to throw this on the table, and it's a 3/3. It doesn't matter if Atraxa is 3/3. It still draws you 4 or 5 cards. It doesn't matter if Atali's a 3/3. It still discovers a million. So I don't know. And there's obviously plenty of other great tricks you can pull with a card like this. So just like free 3/3s every turn, even if you're playing something relatively small, it might actually be good to play like, oh, I have a random 1-drop artifact that kind of sucks in my hand that's not very good. I'll just make it a 3/3. Sure. And again, the extra card every turn. I don't want to repeat myself too much, but like that is a very real thing. Not only does it like make you or let you play like free resources, but it creates resources. Like that's a pretty good card if you can ramp it into play or whatever. So again, I'm not counting this one out of Standard contention at all. But as far as commander players go, please again, knock yourself out. But don't actually knock yourself out. Just have a lot of fun. Number 15 is, you can always tell a card might be a controversial choice when I like smile and laugh to myself before I say it. Enough suspense. Number 15 is Lost Jite. I think this card is actually very good. I think that 1 mana to play it and 1 mana to equip it is shockingly low for what it's actually doing. And decks like Simic Cookies, the green-blue artifacts decks or whatever, they might really, really like this card day one. But that doesn't mean that's the only deck that wants it. The ability to untap lands is crazy. The creature doesn't have to connect for combat damage to the face. Just any combat damage, even to a creature, will do it. That's great. Like, there's so many good things that are kind of retained from the original GT about this. Now, they got rid of the 2 charge counters. They got rid of the ability to remove creatures with GT, which is kind of key, I'll admit. But at the same time, they kept a lot of the stuff that made the old GT really, really good, and they made it much cheaper to cast and equip. So I would not sleep on this if I were you. But there are 2 cards on this list that are much higher up than they really should be on anyone's list, but it's my list. I get to put cards wherever I want them, regardless of objectivity. So the first one was probably Camball, and the next one, number 14, is Rakdos Joins Up. I'm not sure this is as good as I want it to be because it's just a 5 mana reanimation spell, and we already have like kind of a lot of those. I don't even know if you can call this the best 5 mana reanimation spell in Standard. We have like Cruelty of Gix, but that said, there's too many tricks with this, things like Zayatora, fling the creature, deal double damage because Zayatora. But also like Hidetsugu and Kairi, and then like when they kill your Hidetsugu and Kairi, you not only get the free spell and deal the damage with that, but you also deal damage equal to Hidetsugu and Kairi's power, which should be at least 7. Just kind of a disgusting card in like 4 different decks right now. I know I've already mentioned or only mentioned like Jund and Grixis, but trust me, there's a ton more tricks you can do with the Rakdos Joins Up to effectively OTK the opponent. Again, everyone's talking about that 1-turn kill like mono black combo, but I think this adds far more 1-turn kills to the format. Number 13 is the only entry on the entire list I'm cheating on, which is a bit refreshing. Usually I have like 6 entries that are like, now I'm going to talk about 5 cards for this entry. But instead, we're just going to do reprints at number 13. Am I on the right number? Yes, good, professional. Now, this includes everything from Archangel of Tithes to especially Terror of the Peaks, but we also got like Rest in Peace, Torpor Orb, and Grand Abolisher. There's a lot of really good reprints in this set that are going to be kind of hype, like both in sideboards and in main decks. Not sure how great things like Grand Abolisher, Torpor Orb, Rest in Peace, even Archangel. I'm not sure how great they're going to be outside of boards, but there's one thing I'm especially excited about to have in my standard again. It's Terror of the Peaks. Get in my decks. One of my favorite cards of all time. Number 12 is a Metallica song. It's Harvester of Misery. It's probably would have been harder than Harvester of Sorrow, to be honest, but Harvester of Misery may look like it's not actually that much, but it's a removal spell. You see, it's a removal spell, but it can also be a body. I just like stuff like this. You know, I like Trumpeting Carnosaur. I get to like this too. A lot of people say that this is not as good as Massacre Worm. I would say this is probably just as or better. I know it hits your guys too, and Worm doesn't. Worm does a lot of damage when your opponent's creatures die and all that. It's really good in Commander because of that. And yeah, but I think in like 60 card constructed environments, this might be slightly better just because it's easier to play. It only costs the 5 mana. The black commitment isn't quite as high, which is kind of nice. And obviously, it's a removal spell. I'll just bring that up again. You know, Massacre Worm can't be discarded for 2 mana to kill a guy, and this can. So I actually think this is a card that earns its price tag. You know, I thought this would be a bit of a sleeper, and when I looked at the price, it was like $12. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's probably about what this card should be. I expected like $4 or $5, but no, people are paying a premium for this card, and that's because it is as good as I'm trying to convince you it is. 11, the old honorable mention for the top 10. What could it be? It's a card that has moved farther up than any other card on this list. Started around the 30s somewhere, and then the more I look at it, the more I see it in early access, the higher up it moves, guys. Vaultborn Tyrant. Looks like the ultimate Timmy card from the set, and in a way it kind of is, but it's also just cracked. Card is cracked in half. Busted magic card. Once it's on the table and you can ramp into it in your green X deck, you can reanimate it. Plenty of ways to get this on the table. You can fight rigging it out. Seems like it's probably good in your fight rigging deck, so I like that. But yeah, in case you haven't had a chance to read the card yet, it should again be self-evident. Once this card's out, it just becomes absolutely ludicrous, man. But yeah, 3 life. And a card just when he comes into play. And then if anything else large comes into play, you get more cards and more life, and something else will come into play because when he dies, you get a token copy of him that also draws a card and gains life. Card is unbelievable. Catches you back up against aggro, puts cards in your hand against control, is amazing for OTKs. Again, I'm going to mention that with things like Rakdos Joins Up. This card is incredible. With cards like Push Pull, this card is incredible because you'll not only get it, but you'll get another large creature, possibly even another 2 Vaultborn Tyrants. Imagine that. But even if you just pull, I don't know, any other large creature in standard, in a tally or whatever, imagine the value you're going to get off Push Pull, because you'll get Vaultborn Tyrant, a tally will discover, Vaultborn will gain 3 and draw a card, a tally will gain 3 and draw a card, just ridiculous value. And because you played Push Pull, you got to sacrifice the Vaultborn Tyrant EOT. Oh no, that's cool. You get a token copy of it and draw another card and gain some more life. Like, I'm telling you, even outside of like kind of esoteric stuff like Push Pull and Reanimation or whatever, this card is just very solid and might be one of the things that green decks are trying to ramp into or play off of Smuggler Surprise, a card that we'll talk about in just a second. I've been doing that all video. Number 10 is Smuggler Surprise. Just barely cracking my top 10, man. I do think that the better way to resolve an Atraxa in standard might still be to just use Cavern of Souls. You can never Cavern of Souls and cast this card, so I guess that sucks against control, but same token, the card is ludicrous. It's kind of a semi-tooth and nail for 6 mana, but it does a bunch of other stuff too. It's a 3 mana instant speed, draw 2, mill a couple. That's actually better than it looks just on its face. And again, the ability to like give all your big dudes hexproof and indestructible. You know, for 2 mana, you might be able to body like a Deadly Cover-Up or Depopulate or some other non-Sunfall sweeper and just win the game for effectively a couple of mana. So this card has a lot more modes than just drop 2 guys, but honestly, if you can on turn 4 engineer a way to get 6 mana and play this card and you actually have 2 huge dudes in your hand, you probably win. And even if your opponent has Sweeper or something like that, if you have to say go, you probably drew a bunch off the Atraxa, got a Discover off the Detail. Who knows, you know? So there's so much that this card can do that I think that mono green ramp or maybe green blue or 3-color green or something like that might be coming back. Maybe just the domain decks make room for this card. That could be a thing too. But one way or the other, it is seeing some play. To absolutely no one's surprise. Also, by the way, tip, if anybody ever sends you a big old horse, don't open it. Why is there a Trojan War reference in the cowboy set? I don't understand. But anyway, what are we on? Number 9. Look, the last few entries in this entire list, we've looked at Commander All-Stars. We've looked at big old dinosaur tyrants, what do crazy stuff. We looked at a card just now that is half of Tooth and Nail, but honestly, I think a lowly common land is better than just about everything we've looked at so far. And that's Conduit Pylons. Easily one of the best cards in the set. Have we yet learned not to underestimate Surveil on a land? You remember when the Scry lands came out? Like years ago, and everyone's like, I don't know about these. Turns out they were really good. Surveil Lands came out, and a couple people were like, I don't know about those. Turns out they're incredible. They like quadrupled in price after a week because they're that good. And this doesn't even come into play tapped. It doesn't produce 2 colors either, and I'll admit that, but it is an untapped Surveil Land. And I really don't think it has to do anything else. Now, it can fix your mana. It doesn't have to produce colorless. I want to point that out. So, it's not even as bad as it might look at first glance. It does fix your mana if you have enough of it. But that said, just the fact that it's an untapped Surveil for free, again, I feel like I want to say a lot about this card, but I'm probably crushed for time at this point. So I should just say this should self-evidently be like a good Magic card to most people watching. Why is it in my top 10? Yes, it is that good. Let's move on to number 8, which is Colossal Rattleworm, another one that I've kind of called overrated at least once in the last week or so here. But again, got to hammer it home. Overrated doesn't mean bad. End of the day, this is just a big guy. Big guys aren't the best creatures in the world, but once you slap Flash and Trample on there and the ability to ramp once it's dead or once you've pitched it into your yard for whatever reason, then things start getting out of control. Your opponent plays Sunfall, EOT, drop a 6/5. What are they going to do about that? So I actually think that this lines up against a couple of decks in the format really, really well right now. In a way, this is a Wandering Emperor. If you try to attack in, they play Emperor, they knock out one of your dudes, exile it, gain 2. This doesn't gain you the life or anything, but it does flash in, block, and probably kill whatever it wants. So that's kind of like a Green Emperor right there. Just so much to say about this card. Other than the stuff I have been saying, which is no, it's a big guy. Yeah, it's a big guy, Dev, but it does a lot more than just be a big dumb dude. My number 7 is Fomori Vault. I think this card is really, really freaking fantastic, and it's not getting enough attention. I've seen a lot of people call the card straight up bad. Smoking something. Gotta be. And I'm not even adverse to that, but you gotta think straight is all I'm saying. This card's just unbelievable. I think it might even be good in decks it doesn't look good in. I think that you look at this card and you think, oh, I've got to play this in my Commander Artifacts deck for it to be any good. I've got to play this in my my Thousand Moon Smithy all artifact deck in Standard. No, not at all. Not at all. You can just play this in blue-white control. You can devote one spot to this in blue-white control, and then suddenly Mirrex tokens. I've already talked about this video. Mirrex tokens, Clue tokens, Incubator tokens, any other random little artifacts you have on the table. Eventually, you're going to be looking at 5 cards every time you dig with this, which is just kind of unbelievable. I'm not sure that it's better than Mirrex, and Control will probably have to decide EOT, whether they want to activate Mirrex or this. And that might be a tough call some of the time, but I just think it's not going to be too hard to look at least 3 or 4 cards. Make this an Anticipate, make this an Impulse, whatever. And we've already seen on cards like Search for Azcanta, for instance, that an Impulse or an Anticipate, every single turn, is an extremely powerful mode, especially for control deck. But hey, you're looking for card selection? Try Pillage the Bog, why don't you? Number 6 is the card I just said the name of. This it looks at 4 cards. It's a Golgari Impulse, right? Just naturally. I guess it's sorcery speed. I honestly don't really care. But yeah, it's kind of a Golgari Impulse just naturally if you played it on 2 lands. But especially later in the game, not even that late in the game, it starts looking at 6, 8, 10 cards, and that's a massive dig. At some point, I think some people are just going to compare this to Demonic Tutor. Oh, it's a 2-mana tutor if you have enough lands. And yes, that's good. I've seen people make the point that that's not strong enough, but you're telling me Demonic Tutor isn't strong enough for Standard. What? I'm pretty sure that's incorrect. This could go in some sort of Abzan or Sultai, more likely, sort of control deck. And if you're in Sultai, now you have Memory Deluge and pillage the box. You have up to 8 effects that look at the top 1,000 cards of your library and get the best cards. It seems pretty good to me. So I don't know. This is another one that I don't feel like people are sleeping on. They know it exists, but maybe they're just not talking about it enough. I easily think this is one of the best cards in the set. Talk about it more. Look at the top 12 cards of your library. Come on. I mean, if your Topiary Stomper is online when you play this card, you look at the top 14 cards of your library, you're going to find the Atraxa. Let's move on to number 5, which is Satyr the Infiltrator. I am putting this at number 5 against my better judgment. I wanted to put it at like number 30, but like the more I read people's excitement level about the card, the more excited I in turn get. That's fun magic right there. It doesn't even have to be that you cast a reanimation spell. Remember Forsaken Miner back there? Whenever it comes out of your graveyard, you get to draw a card. Like, come on. That's really good. So, like, Satyr could draw you a bunch of cards over the course of the game very easily, and he's only a 2-mana investment to begin with, which is about where you want to be. So I do think if this starts drawing you cards as early as turn 3 and keeps doing so until turn 5 or 6, you probably win, you know? Like this on turn 2 into a Gix on turn 3. How many cards do you need, partner? It's just really, it seems okay to say the least. And in older formats, obviously this is great with like Grief and stuff like that. Just a dumb magic card that probably should have been a higher investment to get in on, but 2 mana is great. Number 4, just barely not in the top 3, is Jace Reawaken. This is actually a pretty good magic card. This was number 1 on both mine and Power Dragon's overrated list. If you haven't seen that video yet, I did a whole podcast linked video, like an hour long, with Power Dragon talking about our top 5 most overrated cards. Go watch that. I'll leave a link in the description if you haven't seen it yet. But again, this was both of our number 1 most overrated, and that's because people are going goo goo gaga geeble over the freaking card right now. And I don't think it's that good, but it's still in my top 5 cards. Like, I still think it's a very powerful magic card. Just getting it down on turn 4 with shields up, good enough. And even though I've said a couple of times that the abilities don't do that much and that I'm not that scared of them, I will say that just ticking up for a card every turn, starting on turn 4 again with shields up, might just be good enough by itself. But the ability to get free spells out of it by plotting things or copy your freaking Breach the Multiverse, whatever you're doing with the ultimate, like that seems really, really good too. So the card may not do anything like that just knocks you out in one turn or whatever, but it doesn't have to. This is one of those methodical planeswalkers that over the course of a few turns will start putting the game out of reach with a superior card advantage, fueling your graveyard, plotting cards for free so you get mana value over your opponent. A card does a lot of things and costs almost no mana to get into play. But we are in the top 3. You ready, everybody? Number 3 is the final showdown. Nobody's ever going to not say it that way when they play the card, right? Or talk about it or whatever. It's going to get very annoying very soon. But final showdown, you know, I have heard a couple of people say this is not a standard card and it's a commander card. I think you're wrong, dude. I just put that on a shirt. I feel like I say it like once in every top 50. It's becoming a catchphrase. But I do think you're wrong, dude or dudette or non-binary friend. I think the card is kind of a mistake. I think we're close to that level here. You know, it's been a few years since we had to worry about Settle the Wreckage in Standard. If you didn't have to play against that card, you are extremely lucky. You don't have to have nightmares about a piece of cardboard, but nevertheless I do. I still wake up with a cold sweat like, Settle the Wreckage! Nowadays, we have to worry that they can blow away one of our guys with a Wandering Emperor if they have 4 untapped mana and 2 of its... We used to have to worry that they were just going to blow away our entire team like dust. Like, Control used to have some pieces, boy. It was not fun, but unless you're a Control player. I played Settle the Wreckage many a time, and this is not quite Settle the Wreckage. It cost, 50% more than a Settle the Wreckage to do the Settle the Wreckage thing, but just the fact that it's instant speed and it's a sweeper does make it a card that I'm going to be worried about every time I swing into that much mana, but it does other stuff too. You can make all the stuff lose their abilities till end of turn, which is an incredible ability that's not really seeing enough talk. Making creatures lose like flying, hexproof, lifelink, and indestructible, and trample, and menace, and like all these keywords. That's good enough, right? But they also lose all other abilities, like Shieldred turns off for a turn or whatever. That might help a lot. So all that's very good too. My number 2 is Slickshot Show Off, another card that's moved up a good bit. This started outside of the top 10, but the more I think about it, the more I'm like, no, Flying Kiln Fiend, yeah, that's good. That's probably one of the better cards in the set. Again, I could see this going all the way back to older formats, modern, vintage even and beyond. This is such a good creature, man. Evasion on your haste prowess, dude, can get out of hand all at once. All of a sudden, you rip this dude off the top on like turn 4 or whatever, and suddenly a monstrous rage and you're in business, baby. And like, you can just bank it too, just bank it and plot it or whatever and save it till after the sweeper. Hold on to, any sort of combat trick or burn spell or whatever. Then suddenly you're getting through for a lot of damage even after the Sunfall takes place. Their incubator token can't block it. I'm in love with this card. You play Kimono Faces Kakazan on turn 1, then suddenly on turn 2, you have like a 2/3 flying prowess. Like, God, where do I sign up for that? Can I have it? This card? Can I have it right now and start playing? I'm not even the biggest fan of mono red or anything, but this card isn't just mono red. Mono red, is it prowess as a real deck now? And this card is a huge part of that. So, oh man, I really could go on about it, but this is one of those too, where it's like, how much do you really have to say about this? It's another Monastery Swiftspear in a format that already had Swiftspear, and once Swiftspear rotates, we'll still have Swiftspear, only it flies. Like, God, it's really, really good Magic card, and I don't think I have to justify it too much. Yeah, I don't know if this is number 1 on anybody else's list, but as usual, we're 3 steps ahead of everybody else. That's why you watch this channel. I'm sorry. The joke was right there, you know what I mean? I just don't know that enough people are judging this card fairly. I was going to say correctly, but that's an awful lot of shade for no reason. I just think that people aren't looking at this card enough. It's not Cryptic Command or anything, but it does just about the best impression we're ever going to see. It doesn't affect the board state in some of the ways that Cryptic can. I hate that it can't bounce stuff. It kind of sucks, whatever. But at the same time, just counter target spell, cast Catalog along with it is crazy enough. If you're looking for the sweeper early in the game, casting Catalog is good enough. If you're trying to reanimate something, casting Catalog is often good enough. That's the 3 mana instant speed mode on this, where you draw 2, discard 1. That's the card Catalog. That's good enough, but if you combo that with a counter spell at the same time, that's an awful lot of like would-be card advantage, fresh cards, and they're down their best spell of the turn. So just that is good. But if you find a good use for this middle mode where you copy a thing you control, like, come on, man. Like, if all you do is counter a spell in the late game while also copying like one of your Wandering Emperor tokens, like that also kind of seems good enough, to be honest. I mean, even if you just have the extra mana laying around and you copy a clue token, like, I think you'll take that some of the time. So I really, really like this card at pretty much every stage of the game. Even if you only use it as a cancel, it's still a hard counter. The floor on this is hard counter or card draw spell at instant speed that gets you 2 cards. Like, those are both good floors. And like, imagine the ceiling in the late game. We already see a couple of blue-white control decks packing a copy or 2 of Dissipate, a copy or 2 of Disruption Protocol. And I think that this blows those cards completely out of the water. I've seen Devious Cover-Up in multiple control decks this season. This card is 1,000 times better than just about any hard counter blue has access to at the moment, and I think they'd be fools not to play it. Like, the old joke is, how powerful can you really make a cancel with upside? And I'm pretty sure this is the answer to that riddle. So I don't know how many people are going to agree with me on this one. Probably not a whole lot, but I do think you need to watch out for this card. If it's ever more than just a hard counter, if they ever actually cast a mode other than the hard counter on top of the hard counter, you're going to see real quick how like done your game is when they do that. But that's all I got for this list, guys. Let me know how you felt about it in the comments section. I don't know if you agree with number 1. If you don't, let me know. And also let me know anything I left off this list that I should have put on, because like I said, I cut like 7 cards off of this list that I kind of really wanted on the list. Wouldn't surprise me if you said a bunch of those down there in the comments section. I'm kind of interested to see if you will. But that said, if there's anything that you didn't see on this list, make sure you check out the Sleepers list. I'll leave a link in the description for that too, because some of your favorite cards may have ended up over there. Aside from that though, I'm more or less donezo for this onezo. So again, just do the YouTube stuff while you're at it. Like the video on your way out. Make sure you sub to the sandwich. I'll use that joke again. And of course, do check out that Patreon. I've been working hard for you over the last couple of weeks here, and $1 a month would really help out a lot. If you want to show some appreciation, again, that's basically the only way I can stay on YouTube is Patreon dollars. So link in the description. It's just $1 a month to help vote on what decks we do this season, and we are in the middle of a poll as I upload this. If you want to pick the first deck tech of the season, there's 4 pretty good choices, and we are basically neck and neck on 2 of them right now. So if you want to affect YouTube history, throw $1 in the Patreon pot, go over there together and vote. But that's all, Ski Kowalski. I'll see you down there in the comments section, and I'll see you again soon with some more Magic videos. Just because we're done with the top 50 doesn't mean we're done making videos. Some people seem to think I only come around for this one video every 3 months, but no, there's other content on the channel. Check it out. But anyway, I am, in fact, which one have I not used yet? That is Itsky Lewitsky. So I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from the Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.